The shot that killed Thomas Dawson on a cold March morning in 1883 didn't just end one man's life. It shattered the entire world of his 22-year-old daughter, Olivia, who watched from the mercantile doorway as her father crumpled into the muddy street of Custer, South Dakota. The argument had been over a land dispute, something about water rights and property lines that men in these parts seemed willing to die over. Olivia had heard the raised voices from inside the store where she'd been restocking shelves of tinned goods, but by the time she reached the door, the stranger's pistol was already drawn. Her father hadn't even reached for his own weapon before the bullet tore through his chest. The killer rode off in a cloud of dust before anyone could stop him, leaving Thomas bleeding out in front of the business he'd built with his own 2 hands over 15 years. Olivia dropped to her knees beside him, her skirts soaking up the mixture of mud and blood, cradling his head in her lap as Doc Pritchard came running from across the street. But they both knew it was too late. Thomas looked up at his daughter with eyes already growing dim, tried to speak, managed only a wet cough that brought blood to his lips, and then he was gone. Just like that. One moment her father was alive, arguing with a stranger over something that now seemed impossibly trivial, and the next he was dead weight in her arms, his eyes staring at nothing. The funeral was 3 days later, a simple affair at the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Custer. Half the town showed up because Thomas Dawson had been well liked, a fair merchant who extended credit when times were hard and never cheated anyone on their purchases. Olivia stood beside the grave in her mother's old black dress, the only mourning clothes she owned since her mother had died of fever when Olivia was just 14. 8 years of having only her father, and now he was gone too. The preacher said words that were meant to be comforting, but just sounded hollow. People offered condolences that slid off her like water off oilcloth. What was she supposed to do with their sympathy? It wouldn't bring her father back. It wouldn't pay the debts she discovered when she went through his papers. It wouldn't keep the mercantile running when she barely knew how to manage the books, let alone negotiate with suppliers or handle the rougher customers who sometimes came through town. After everyone left, Olivia stood alone by the grave until the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful for such a terrible day. She had no other family, no siblings, no aunts or uncles nearby, no one. Just herself and a business she didn't know how to run and debts she didn't know how to pay. The first week after the funeral passed in a blur. Olivia opened the mercantile each morning because she didn't know what else to do. Customers came in, bought what they needed, and she took their money and made change like a mechanical doll going through motions. At night, she locked up and climbed the stairs to the small apartment above the store where she and her father had lived, and she sat in the silence trying to figure out what she was going to do. The debts were worse than she'd initially thought. Her father had borrowed money to expand his inventory last fall, betting on a harsh winter that would drive up demand. But the winter had been mild, and now he owed the bank nearly $800, due in 6 months. There were also outstanding payments to suppliers in Rapid City and Deadwood, smaller amounts, but still significant. Altogether, Olivia calculated she needed to come up with over $1,000 just to break even, and that wasn't counting what she'd need to actually live on. She tried. God knows she tried. She opened every morning at dawn and didn't close until well after dark. She went through her father's ledgers and called in debts from customers who owed him money, though most of them were struggling themselves. She wrote letters to the suppliers asking for extensions. She even went to the bank to speak with Mr. Holloway about possibly renegotiating the loan terms. Mr. Holloway had been sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson. Truly I am. Your father was a good man, but the bank has its own obligations. Unless you can show me a solid plan for paying back what's owed, I can't extend the deadline." 6 months isn't enough time, Olivia had said, hating how her voice shook. "If you could just give me a year, I'm sure I could make it work." But Holloway had shaken his head. "I wish I could help. But those are the terms of the loan your father signed. 6 months from the date of his death, which means September 1st. If you can't pay by then, the bank will have to seize the property and sell it to recoup our losses." Olivia had walked out of that bank feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. Lose the mercantile. Lose the only home she'd ever known, the business her father had poured his life into building. It was unthinkable. But as March turned to April and she looked at the numbers every night, it was also starting to seem inevitable. That was when Quincy Morris rode into town. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, leading a pack mule loaded with pelts and riding a sturdy roan horse that had clearly covered a lot of miles. Olivia noticed him from the mercantile window because there was something about the way he sat his saddle that caught her attention. Confident but not arrogant, watchful but not paranoid. He was tall. She could see that even mounted, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard on his jaw. He tied his horse to the rail outside the mercantile and came in, ducking slightly under the door frame. Up close, Olivia could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with gray eyes that took in the whole store in one sweeping glance before settling on her behind the counter. "Afternoon," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. His voice was deep with a slight Texas drawl. "I'm needing some supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition if you've got .4440. "We have all of that," Olivia said, moving to gather what he'd requested. Her hands went through the familiar motions of measuring out flour and salt into paper sacks, pulling down a bag of coffee beans, retrieving a box of cartridges from the locked cabinet behind the counter. "Passing through or staying? Bit of both, maybe," Quincy said, watching her work. "Heard there might be work around here for someone good with horses. I've been up in the Dakotas for a while now, trapping mostly, but I'm thinking about settling somewhere for a spell. The Bar J Ranch about 5 miles west of town is usually looking for good hands," Olivia said automatically, the kind of local information she'd grown up knowing. "Mr. Johnson runs a decent operation there. Appreciate that." Quincy paid for his supplies in cash, counting out the coins carefully. As he gathered up his parcels, he paused. "You running this place yourself?" "Yes," Olivia said, and she heard the defensiveness in her own voice. "That's a lot of work for one person," Quincy observed. It wasn't criticism, just a statement of fact, but it still made Olivia bristle. "I manage," she said curtly. Quincy studied her for a moment with those calm gray eyes, and Olivia had the uncomfortable feeling he saw more than she wanted him to. But all he said was, "I'm sure you do." "Thank you for the supplies, Miss Dawson." "Olivia Dawson, Quincy Morris. Pleased to meet you, Miss Dawson." He touched his hat brim again and left, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Olivia watched him ride off down the street and told herself she wouldn't think about him again. She had too many other things to worry about. But that evening, as she was closing up, she found herself remembering the steady way he'd looked at her, without pity or presumption, just honest assessment. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her like she was anything other than poor Thomas Dawson's orphaned daughter. She saw him again 3 days later. She was struggling to unload a shipment of goods from the freight wagon that had come from Rapid City. Heavy crates that her father would have handled easily, but that were almost more than she could manage. The freight driver had helped her get them off the wagon, but he had other deliveries to make and couldn't stay to help her get them inside and unpacked. Olivia was wrestling with a crate of tinned goods, trying to drag it across the threshold without dropping it, when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Quincy Morris standing there, already reaching for the crate. "Let me get that," he said. Pride made her want to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you." He lifted the crate like it weighed nothing and carried it inside. "Where do you want it?" "Back corner, by the others." He set it down where she indicated, then went back out for another one before she could say anything. Within 10 minutes, he'd moved all 6 crates inside, stacking them neatly where she could get at them to unpack later. When he was done, he wasn't even breathing hard, though Olivia's arms were aching from the one crate she'd tried to move. "I appreciate the help," Olivia said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Quincy said. "Just being neighborly." "Around here, people expect to be paid for their labor," Olivia said. She couldn't afford to just let people help her out of charity. It felt too much like pity. Quincy regarded her thoughtfully. "All right then. How about you tell me where I might find a decent meal in this town? I've been eating my own cooking for too long." Despite everything, Olivia felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Mrs. Chen's boarding house, 2 blocks down on the left. She serves dinner at 6 and it's the best food in Custer." "Fair trade," Quincy said. "Thank you, Miss Dawson." He left before she could say anything else, and Olivia stood in her mercantile surrounded by crates, feeling oddly unsettled. There was something about Quincy Morris that got under her skin, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Maybe it was just that he'd helped her without making her feel weak for needing help. That was rare enough to be remarkable. Over the next few weeks, Olivia kept seeing Quincy around town. He'd gotten work at the Bar J Ranch. She learned from the gossip that flowed through the mercantile. He was good with horses, everyone said, had a real gift for working with the difficult ones. He came into the store every week or so for supplies, always polite, never lingering longer than necessary. But somehow he always seemed to show up when she needed an extra pair of hands for something heavy or awkward. "You don't have to keep helping me," Olivia said one afternoon when he'd appeared just as she was trying to rearrange the heavy flour barrels in the storeroom. "I know you have your own work to do." "I'm on my own time right now," Quincy said, already moving one of the barrels. "Besides, I don't mind. Where do these need to go?" Olivia directed him, watching the easy strength in his movements. He'd cleaned up since she'd first seen him, shaved the beard and gotten his hair cut, and she had to admit he was handsome in a rough-hewn way. Strong jaw, straight nose, those observant gray eyes that never missed much. "How's business?" Quincy asked as he positioned the last barrel. The question caught her off guard. Most people in town avoided asking about the mercantile, probably because they'd heard the rumors about her father's debts. "Managing," she said, which was a generous description of barely keeping her head above water. Quincy leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, but you look tired, Miss Dawson. Like you're carrying more weight than one person should have to carry alone." Olivia felt something crack inside her chest, some defensive wall she'd been holding up for weeks. Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice, or the fact that he'd actually noticed when most people just looked past her, or maybe she was just exhausted past the point of pride. Whatever the reason, she found herself telling him the truth. "My father left debts," she said quietly. "More than I can pay. The bank is going to take the mercantile in September if I can't come up with $800, and that's just what I owe them. There are other debts, too. I've been trying, but I don't think I can make enough in time. And even if I could, I don't know enough about running this place to make it profitable long term. My father never taught me the business side of things. He always just handled it himself." Quincy was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What were you planning to do if you lose the store?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted, and saying it out loud made it feel terrifyingly real. "I don't have anywhere else to go. No family, no other skills really. I can read and write and do figures, but that doesn't qualify me for much. I suppose I could try to find work as a teacher or maybe a seamstress, but those positions are few and far between out here." "You ever think about having a partner?" Quincy asked. "Someone who could help with the business side of things, maybe bring in some capital to pay off the debts." Olivia laughed, though there was no humor in it. Who would want to partner with a failing business and a woman who barely knows what she's doing? "Someone who sees potential," Quincy said simply. "This is a good location, and from what I've seen, you work hard. The store has a solid reputation in town. With some investment and smart management, it could be profitable again." "That's a nice thought, but I don't exactly have investors lining up," Olivia said. Quincy pushed off from the wall, his eyes never leaving hers. "What if I wanted to invest?" Olivia stared at him. "What?" "I've got some money saved up from trapping," Quincy said. "Enough to pay off your bank debt and have some left over for operating capital. I've been thinking about putting down roots somewhere, maybe starting a business. A mercantile makes sense, especially one that's already established. We could be partners. I'd handle the business management and the heavy work. You'd handle the day-to-day operations and customer relations. Split the profits 50-50. "You barely know me," Olivia said, her mind reeling. "Why would you risk your money on a stranger?" "I'm a pretty good judge of character," Quincy said. "And I've been watching how you handle yourself these past weeks. You're smart, hardworking, and honest. Those are good qualities for a business partner. Plus, I've already asked around town about your father's reputation and the store's history. This is a sound investment, Miss Dawson. I wouldn't be offering if I didn't think we could both benefit from it." Olivia's heart was pounding. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. "What's the real reason you're offering this?" Quincy's expression was steady, open. "The real reason is that I'm tired of drifting. I'm tired of spending winters alone in trapping cabins and summers working temporary jobs. I want to build something permanent, something that lasts, and I think this could be it. But I can't do it alone, just like you can't do it alone. Together, though, we might have a real chance." "I need to think about it," Olivia said, even though part of her wanted to say yes immediately just from the sheer relief of having someone offer to help carry the impossible weight she'd been struggling under. "Of course," Quincy said. "Take all the time you need. I'll be at the bar J if you want to talk more about it." After he left, Olivia sat in the storeroom for a long time, her mind spinning. It was a crazy idea. Partner with a man she'd known for less than a month. Let him invest his savings in her father's failing business. It was impulsive and risky and possibly stupid. But what other choice did she have? She'd been over the numbers 100 times. She couldn't make enough profit in 5 months to pay off the debts and save the store. She tried every other option she could think of. This was a lifeline being thrown to a drowning woman, and she'd be a fool not to at least consider grabbing it. Over the next few days, Olivia made discreet inquiries about Quincy Morris. What she learned was reassuring. He'd been working at the bar J for 3 weeks now, and Mr. Johnson spoke highly of him, said he was one of the best horse handlers he'd ever hired. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house said he was quiet and respectful, always paid his rent on time. The men who drank with him at the saloon reported he was slow to anger, quick to laugh, and could be trusted to keep his word. Nobody had a bad word to say about him, which in a small town where gossip was currency was remarkable. Finally, on a Sunday afternoon when the store was closed, Olivia walked out to the Bar J Ranch. It was a pleasant day for early May, warm but not hot, with wildflowers blooming in the grass alongside the road. She found Quincy in one of the corrals, working with a young horse that was clearly not yet accustomed to the saddle. He moved around the animal with patient confidence, speaking in a low, steady voice that seemed to calm the nervous creature. He noticed her watching and said something to one of the other ranch hands who took over with the horse. Then he climbed over the fence and walked to meet her, dusting off his hands on his pants. "Miss Dawson," he said, and she could see the question in his eyes. "I want to see your books," Olivia said. "If we're going to be partners, I need to know exactly how much you're investing and what our financial situation will be after the debts are paid." A slow smile spread across Quincy's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "That sounds like a yes." "It's a conditional yes," Olivia corrected. "Contingent on us working out terms that are fair to both of us and getting everything in writing with a proper legal contract." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Quincy said. "Come on, I've got my papers in my room at the bunkhouse." They spent the rest of the afternoon going over numbers. Quincy had been remarkably successful as a trapper, Olivia discovered. He'd saved nearly $1,200 over the past 3 years, living frugally and investing his earnings carefully. He proposed putting $850 into the partnership, enough to pay off the bank loan and the most pressing supplier debts with a small cushion left for operating expenses. "What about your own security?" Olivia asked. "You'd be putting almost all your savings into this." "What if it fails? Then I'll go back to trapping and start over," Quincy said with a shrug. "I'm young and healthy. I can afford to take the risk, can you?" "I don't have a choice," Olivia said honestly. "Without this, I lose everything anyway." They drafted terms for the partnership right there, writing out everything in clear language. Equal ownership, equal say in business decisions, profits to be split 50-50 after expenses, and a modest living wage for both of them. Quincy would handle purchasing, negotiations with suppliers, and physical maintenance of the building. Olivia would manage daily operations, inventory, and customer service. Major decisions would be made jointly. "We should have a lawyer look at this," Olivia said when they'd finished. "Agreed." "And I want to add one more clause," Quincy said. "Either partner can buy out the other's share at fair market value if they want to dissolve the partnership. That way neither of us is trapped if it doesn't work out." It was a reasonable protection for both of them, so Olivia nodded. They took the draft to Samuel Gentry, the lawyer in town, the next day. He looked it over, suggested a few minor modifications for clarity, and drew up a formal contract. 3 days later, Olivia and Quincy both signed it in Gentry's office, with the lawyer and his clerk serving as witnesses. "Congratulations," Gentry said, shaking both their hands. "I hope this partnership proves prosperous for you both." Walking out of the lawyer's office, Olivia felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. The crushing weight of her father's debts was still there, but now she wasn't carrying it alone. She had a partner, a real partner who was invested both financially and personally in making the mercantile succeed. "Thank you," she said to Quincy as they stood on the boardwalk outside Gentry's office. "I know I already said it, but I need to say it again. You're saving my life with this." "We're saving each other," Quincy said. "You're giving me a chance to build something permanent." "That's worth more to me than the money." They went to the bank together that afternoon. Mr. Holloway looked surprised when they walked in together, and even more surprised when Quincy counted out $820 in cash to pay off Thomas Dawson's loan in full. "Well," Holloway said, writing out a receipt, "I admit I didn't expect this, Miss Dawson. Congratulations on finding a solution. Mr. Morris and I are partners now," Olivia said, and there was fierce satisfaction in saying it out loud. The mercantile is no longer in debt to your bank. Walking out of that bank with the paid-in-full receipt in her hand felt like victory. Quincy helped her send payments to the suppliers in Rapid City and Deadwood over the next few days, settling those accounts as well. By the end of the week, the mercantile was debt-free for the first time in months, and they had nearly $200 in operating capital. "Now comes the hard part," Quincy said as they sat in the storeroom going over inventory. "Making this place profitable. What do you have in mind?" Olivia asked. Quincy pulled out a list he'd been working on. "First, we need to expand our customer base. Right now, you mostly serve people in town, but there are ranches and homesteads all around here that are going to suppliers in Rapid City or Deadwood because the trip is worth it for the selection and prices. We need to give them a reason to come here instead. How do we do that?" "Better selection, competitive prices, and service they can't get elsewhere," Quincy said. "I was thinking we could offer delivery to the outlying ranches once a month, maybe twice if there's demand. We take orders, fill them, and deliver right to their door. Charge a small delivery fee, but save them the 2 or 3 day trip to the bigger towns." It was a smart idea. "That would require a bigger wagon and probably another horse," Olivia said, already calculating costs. "I've got my roan and the mule," Quincy said. "We could trade the mule and some cash for a draft horse and a proper freight wagon. My horse can still be used for the lighter deliveries." They spent the evening planning, and for the first time since her father's death, Olivia felt something like hope stirring in her chest. With Quincy's business sense and her knowledge of the customers and the local market, they might actually be able to make this work. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Quincy traded his mule and $60 for a sturdy draft horse and a freight wagon in good condition. He repaired the roof of the mercantile where it had been leaking and fixed the front steps that had been getting dangerously worn. He renegotiated their supply contracts, using his natural charm and shrewd bargaining to get better prices and terms. Olivia, meanwhile, went through the entire inventory, reorganizing and restocking. She put together a catalog of goods they could order on request, expanding their offerings beyond what they could keep in stock. She designed a flyer advertising their new delivery service and distributed it to every ranch and homestead within 20 miles of Custer. They worked side by side from dawn until well after dark most days, and Olivia found herself enjoying it more than she'd expected. Quincy was easy to work with, never condescending or domineering despite his greater business experience. He asked her opinion on decisions and actually listened to her answers. When they disagreed about something, they talked it through until they found a compromise that satisfied both of them. And he made her laugh, which she hadn't done much of since her father died. He had a dry wit and a gift for storytelling, sharing tales from his years of trapping and drifting that were by turns funny and harrowing. In the evenings, after they closed up shop, they'd sit in the storeroom with the account books and talk while they worked, and Olivia found herself looking forward to those quiet conversations as much as anything else. By mid-June, their efforts were starting to show results. The delivery service was a hit with the outlying ranches, bringing in new customers who'd never shopped at the mercantile before. Word spread that Morris and Dawson Mercantile had good prices, reliable service, and friendly proprietors, and business started picking up. They weren't making a fortune, but they were turning a steady profit, enough to cover expenses and put a little aside for savings. "We're going to make it," Olivia said one evening in late June as she tallied up the week's receipts. "We're actually going to make it." "Never doubted it," Quincy said from where he was restocking shelves. "You're a hell of a businesswoman, Olivia Dawson." It was the first time he'd used her first name without the miss, and somehow it felt significant. They'd been partners for 6 weeks now, working together every day, and somewhere along the way they'd gone from polite strangers to something like friends. Maybe more than friends, though Olivia was afraid to examine that thought too closely. She watched him work, the way his shoulders moved under his shirt as he reached up to place goods on high shelves, the concentration on his face as he organized everything just so. He was a good man, she thought, steady and reliable and kind, with depths she was only beginning to discover. And he was handsome too, though that seemed almost beside the point given everything else. As if feeling her gaze, Quincy turned and caught her watching. Their eyes met, and Olivia felt her breath catch at the intensity in his expression. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air between them suddenly charged with something electric and terrifying and wonderful. Then Quincy cleared his throat and looked away. "Getting late. I should head back to the bunkhouse." "Right," Olivia said, flustered. "I'll see you tomorrow." After he left, she sat alone in the mercantile's dim interior, her heart racing. This was dangerous territory. Quincy was her business partner. Their relationship needed to stay professional, uncomplicated. Getting romantic feelings involved could ruin everything they'd built together. But as she lay in bed that night in the apartment above the store, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the way Quincy had looked at her. Like she was something precious and important, like she mattered to him beyond just their business arrangement. She was still thinking about it the next morning when Quincy arrived to open up, and she nearly dropped the jar of pickles she was holding when he walked in. He gave her a quizzical look, but didn't comment, just hung up his hat and got to work. They fell into their usual routine, but Olivia was hyper-aware of him in a way she hadn't been before. Every time they passed each other in the narrow aisles, she felt the space between them like a physical thing. When their hands brushed as they both reached for the same ledger book, she felt the touch all the way to her toes. This was madness. She needed to get control of herself. But then July came, and with it the Independence Day celebration that Custer put on every year. The whole town turned out for races and games and a dance in the evening. The mercantile was closed for the day, one of the few times all year when every business in town shut down. Olivia had planned to spend the day quietly, maybe watch the festivities from a distance. She still wore mourning for her father, though it had been 4 months now. But Mrs. Chen, who'd become something of a friend over the past weeks, convinced her to come to the celebration. "Your father would want you to live your life, dear," Mrs. Chen said firmly. 4 months is respectable mourning. You don't have to dance if you don't want to, but at least come and be among people. It will do you good. So Olivia found herself at the town square that evening, wearing one of her regular dresses instead of the black mourning clothes. It felt strange but also liberating, like she was allowing herself to step back into the world of the living after months of existing in a gray fog of grief. She saw Quincy across the square, talking with some of the men from the Bar J Ranch. He'd cleaned up nice, she noticed, wearing what looked like a new shirt and vest. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met across the crowd. He said something to the men he was with and started making his way toward her. "Evening," he said when he reached her. "You look nice." "Thank you," Olivia said, suddenly shy. "So do you." They stood there awkwardly for a moment and then the music started. It was a lively reel and couples were already moving onto the makeshift dance floor. "Would you like to dance?" Quincy asked. Olivia hesitated. She hadn't danced since before her father died. It seemed frivolous, almost disrespectful. But Mrs. Chen's words echoed in her mind. "Your father would want you to live your life." "Yes," she said. "I would." Quincy led her onto the dance floor and took her hand. His other hand settled at her waist, warm through the fabric of her dress, and then they were moving. He was a good dancer, Olivia discovered, confident in his steps and easy to follow. She let herself relax into the music and the movement, and for the first time in months, she felt something like joy bubbling up inside her. They danced 3 dances in a row before taking a break, breathless and laughing. Quincy got them both cups of lemonade from the refreshment table, and they found a relatively quiet spot to stand and watch the other dancers. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Quincy said after a moment, his tone turning serious. Olivia's stomach clenched. "What is it?" "My lease on the bunkhouse room at the Bar J is up at the end of the month," Quincy said. "I was thinking it doesn't make much sense for me to keep living out there when I'm spending all my time at the Mercantile anyway. There's an apartment above the store, right? Where you live?" "Yes," Olivia said slowly. "It's just 2 rooms and a small kitchen. I'm in 1 bedroom and the other is storage right now." "What if I rented that second room from you?" Quincy asked. "It would be more convenient for the business and the rent money would help with expenses. We'd need to set some ground rules for privacy and such, but I think we could make it work, if you're comfortable with the idea." It was a practical suggestion, and Olivia could see the business sense in it. But the idea of Quincy living in the same apartment, just a thin wall away from her bedroom, made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with business. "Let me think about it," she said. "Of course. No pressure." They danced a few more dances as the evening went on, and Olivia found herself leaning into Quincy's solid presence, enjoying the feeling of his hand at her waist and the way he looked down at her when they moved through the turns of the dance. This was dangerous, she knew. But she couldn't seem to make herself care. When the dance finally ended near midnight, Quincy walked her back to the Mercantile. They stood outside the door in the summer darkness, and Olivia was acutely aware of how close he was standing, how easy it would be to just lean forward and "Good night, Olivia," Quincy said softly. "Good night," she managed. She watched him walk away down the street toward the livery where he'd stabled his horse, and then she went inside and climbed the stairs to her empty apartment. She lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it would mean to have Quincy living here. To see him first thing in the morning and last thing at night. To share meals and quiet evenings and all the small, intimate moments of daily life. It was too much. It was moving too fast. They'd only known each other for 3 months. But she also couldn't deny the truth that was becoming more obvious every day. She was falling in love with Quincy Morris. Maybe she'd been falling since that first day he'd helped her with the crates, or maybe it had happened gradually over weeks of working side by side. But either way, it was happening, and she didn't know how to stop it. The question was, did she want to stop it? Over the next few days, Olivia found herself watching Quincy with new awareness. The way he was patient with difficult customers, the way he always made sure she ate lunch even when they were busy, the way he'd fix the squeaky hinge on her apartment door without being asked. 100 small kindnesses and considerations that added up to something bigger. And sometimes, she'd catch him watching her with that same intense expression she'd seen in his eyes before, the one that made her heart race and her breath catch. Like he was thinking the same impossible thoughts she was. Finally, on a quiet afternoon when there were no customers in the store, Olivia made her decision. "About your offer to rent the second room," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think it's a good idea, if you're still interested." Quincy looked up from the invoice he was checking, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "I'm interested. We'll need to clear out the storage and get you a proper bed and furniture," Olivia said, already making mental lists. And we should establish some rules about shared spaces and privacy. Whatever makes you comfortable, Quincy agreed. They spent the next week getting the second bedroom ready. Quincy built a simple bed frame and bought a mattress from the furniture maker in town. Olivia sewed new curtains for the window and found a chest of drawers that had belonged to her parents. By the time Quincy moved his belongings in at the end of July, the room looked cozy and lived in. Living in the same apartment proved easier than Olivia had expected. Quincy was neat and considerate, always cleaning up after himself and being mindful of noise. They fell into a comfortable domestic routine, taking turns making breakfast in the small kitchen, sharing meals at the end of long days, sitting together in the evenings while Olivia mended or read and Quincy worked on the account books or carved small wooden figures as a hobby. It felt like playing house, Olivia thought sometimes, like they were pretending to be something more than business partners. But it also felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain, like this was how things were always meant to be. August brought a heat wave that had everyone in town moving slowly and seeking shade. Business at the mercantile actually picked up because people would come in just to escape the brutal sun for a few minutes. Olivia and Quincy kept buckets of water by the door for customers and passers-by, and they sold more lemonade, powder, and ice that month than they had all year. One particularly sweltering afternoon, when it was too hot to do much of anything, Quincy suggested they close up early and go to the creek that ran about a mile outside of town. "We've been working ourselves to the bone," he said. "One afternoon off won't hurt anything, and we'll be more productive tomorrow if we're not heat exhausted." Olivia couldn't argue with that logic. They locked up the mercantile, left a sign on the door saying they'd reopen in the morning, and walked out to the creek. The water was clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the Black Hills, and there was blessed shade under the cottonwood trees that lined the bank. Olivia sat on a flat rock with her skirts pulled up to her knees, dangling her feet in the water while Quincy waded in up to his waist, his pants rolled up and his shirt abandoned on the bank. She tried not to stare at the play of muscles in his shoulders and back, but it was difficult. "Water's fine," Quincy called. "You should come in." "I'm perfectly comfortable here," Olivia said, though the cool water on her feet did make her want to wade in deeper. Quincy grinned, and before she realized what he was planning, he'd scooped up a handful of water and flung it at her. The cold droplets hit her face and the front of her dress, making her gasp. "Quincy Morris, don't you dare." But he was already gathering more water, laughing at her outrage. Olivia abandoned dignity entirely and waded in after him, splashing water back at him with both hands. They chased each other around the creek like children, laughing and shouting, until Olivia slipped on a smooth rock and would have fallen if Quincy hadn't caught her. His arms went around her waist, steadying her, and suddenly they were standing very close together in the waist-deep water. Olivia's hands were braced against his chest, and she could feel his heart beating fast under her palms. His wet hair was falling into his eyes, and water droplets clung to his eyelashes, and he was looking at her with an expression that made her breath stop. "Olivia," he said softly, and it wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. She knew she should step back, put distance between them, maintain the professional boundaries that were supposed to exist between business partners. But she didn't want to. She wanted to stay right here in Quincy's arms, wanted to lean into the solid warmth of him, wanted to find out what his lips would feel like against hers. "Yes," she whispered, answering the unspoken question. Quincy's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with incredible gentleness. Then he bent his head and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving her time to change her mind. But Olivia pressed closer, her arm sliding up around his neck, and the kiss deepened. She'd been kissed before, a few fumbling attempts by boys when she was younger, but this was nothing like those awkward encounters. This was fire and sweetness and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Me too," Olivia said. "I know this complicates things," Quincy said. "The partnership, the business, everything. But Olivia, I can't keep pretending I only see you as a business associate. You're more than that to me, so much more." "You're more to me too," Olivia said, her heart feeling like it might burst. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Quincy's arms tightened around her. "Thank God," he said fervently, "because I'm completely in love with you, and I was terrified you didn't feel the same way." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. When they finally made their way back to the creek bank and sat down on the grass to dry off in the sun, Quincy kept hold of her hand like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "So what do we do now?" Olivia asked. "Well, I'd like to court you properly," Quincy said. "Take you to dinner, go on picnics, all the things a man does when he's trying to win a woman's heart. Though I guess I've already won it, which makes things easier." "Easier and more complicated," Olivia said with a laugh. "We live together, we work together, and now we're courting." "What will people say? Does it matter?" Quincy asked seriously. "We haven't done anything improper. We're both adults, and how we conduct our personal lives is our business. If people want to gossip, let them. I'm more concerned with making you happy." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling happier than she had in months, maybe years. "You do make me happy. You make me feel like maybe I can actually build a life here, not just survive, but really live." "That's all I want," Quincy said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "To build a life with you. The mercantile is just the beginning, Olivia. We can make something really good together if you'll have me." "I'll have you," Olivia said softly. They stayed by the creek until the sun started setting, talking about everything and nothing. Quincy told her more about his childhood in Texas, growing up on a small ranch with 3 brothers. She told him about her mother, the things she remembered before fever took her, and about her father's quiet strength and kindness. They talked about their hopes for the mercantile and their dreams for the future. By the time they walked back to town, it was full dark, and the stars were bright overhead. Quincy held her hand the whole way, and Olivia felt like she was glowing from the inside out. Life at the mercantile took on a new dimension after that. They were still business partners, still worked together every day managing the store. But now, there were stolen kisses in the storeroom when no customers were around, and quiet evenings sitting close together on the small sofa in their apartment, and the sweet ache of falling deeper in love with each passing day. True to his word, Quincy courted her properly. He took her to dinner at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, sitting across from her at the table and talking like they hadn't just spent the entire day together. He brought her wildflowers he'd picked on his early morning rides. He carved her a small wooden bird that she kept on her dresser. Little gestures that made her feel cherished and important. The town noticed, of course. People talked, speculating about the nature of their relationship. But Mrs. Chen proved to be a staunch ally, firmly telling anyone who would listen that Olivia Dawson and Quincy Morris were 2 young people conducting themselves with perfect propriety, and anyone who suggested otherwise could mind their own business. September arrived, bringing cooler weather and the knowledge that they'd made it past the deadline that had once seemed impossible. The bank no longer had any claim on the mercantile, and the business was thriving. They'd expanded their inventory, established regular delivery routes to all the major ranches in the area, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality goods. "Your father would be proud," Quincy said one evening as they went over the account books. "Look at what you've built here." "What we've built," Olivia corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "We make a good team," Quincy agreed. Then he set down his pencil and turned to face her fully. "Olivia, I need to ask you something." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "What is it?" Quincy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Olivia saw a simple gold ring with a small diamond, nothing fancy but clearly chosen with care. "I know we've only known each other 6 months," Quincy said, "and I know some people might think we're moving too fast. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Olivia Dawson. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I love working beside you every day and falling asleep knowing you're just on the other side of the wall. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building our business and our home together. Will you marry me?" Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in grief and debt, certain she was going to lose everything her father had built. Now she had a thriving business, a home, and a man who loved her, looking at her with hope and tenderness in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I'll marry you." Quincy slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her like she was air and he'd been drowning. Olivia kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and joy she felt, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Custer. Mrs. Chen stood up as Olivia's witness, and Mr. Johnson from the Bar J stood up for Quincy. Half the town showed up, cramming into the little church to watch Olivia Dawson become Olivia Morris. She wore a dress she'd made herself from pale blue fabric, thinking her father wouldn't want her in widow's black on her wedding day. Quincy wore his good suit and looked so handsome it made her heart ache. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Quincy kissed her, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. The reception was held at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it was joyful, and that was what mattered. When they finally left to return to their apartment above the Mercantile, now truly their shared home, Olivia felt like the luckiest woman alive. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Quincy treating her like something precious. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they now shared, Olivia traced patterns on his chest and thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 6 months. "What are you thinking?" Quincy asked, his hand running through her loose hair. "That I almost lost everything," Olivia said quietly. "When my father died, I thought my world had ended, and in a way it did. But you helped me build a new one from the ground up. A better one, I think." "We built it together," Quincy said, tilting her face up so he could kiss her forehead. "And we're going to keep building it one day at a time. We'll make the Mercantile the best in the territory. We'll have a family, raise kids who know they're loved. We'll grow old together and sit on our front porch watching the sunset. All of it, Olivia, the whole beautiful life. Promise," she whispered. "I promise," Quincy said solemnly. "I'm with you until the end, however long that may be. You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Morris." "Good," Olivia said, snuggling closer. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The months that followed their marriage were busy and happy. They continued to grow the Mercantile, adding new product lines and services. By the end of 1883, they were the largest general store between Rapid City and Deadwood, with regular customers coming from 50 miles away. They hired a young man named Thomas, named after Olivia's father, to help with deliveries and the heavier work around the store. In the spring of 1884, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Quincy one evening after they'd closed up shop, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. His face lit up with joy, and he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby," he said in wonder. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Olivia asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Quincy said, cradling her face in his hands. "You've given me everything, Olivia. A home, a business, a life worth living, and now a child." "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Olivia said, pulling him down for a kiss. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Olivia tired more quickly as she grew larger. Quincy insisted she take it easy, taking on more of the daily work at the mercantile himself. He was protective to the point of being overbearing sometimes, but Olivia found it endearing rather than annoying. After a lifetime of having to be strong and self-sufficient, it was nice to let someone take care of her for a change. Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Olivia wondered if she'd survive it. But finally, after nearly 20 hours, the baby emerged with a lusty cry that was the most beautiful sound Olivia had ever heard. "You have a son, Mrs. Chen," who'd served as midwife, said, placing the squalling infant in Olivia's arms. Olivia looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the miniature hands waving in the air, and felt her heart expand in a way she hadn't known was possible. This was her child, hers and Quincy's, a perfect blend of both of them. "He's beautiful," Quincy said from beside the bed, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out to touch the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers immediately wrapped around his much larger one. "Hello, son. We've been waiting for you." They named him Thomas Quincy Morris after both his grandfathers. Tom for short. He had Olivia's blue eyes and Quincy's dark hair, and from the start, he had a personality all his own. He was a content baby for the most part, happy to sleep in a basket in the corner of the mercantile while his parents worked. Customers loved to stop and coo over him, and he seemed to thrive on the attention. Watching Quincy with their son made Olivia fall in love with him all over again. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, always willing to walk the floor with Tom when he was fussy or sing him silly songs to make him laugh. He'd strap the baby to his back in a carrier he'd made himself when he needed to do work around the store, and Tom would babble happily while his father restocked shelves or swept floors. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier but infinitely richer. The mercantile continued to prosper, allowing them to save money and even make some improvements to the building. They expanded the apartment upstairs, adding another bedroom for Tom and a slightly larger kitchen. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. 2 years passed in a blur of work and family life. Tom learned to walk and then to run, careening through the mercantile and making customers laugh with his antics. He was a bright child, curious about everything, always asking questions in his toddler vocabulary. Both Olivia and Quincy doted on him, though they tried not to spoil him too much. In the summer of 1886, Olivia found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was sick for the first few months in a way she hadn't been with Tom. But Quincy was there through all of it, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her crackers and ginger tea, taking over all her duties at the store without complaint. Their daughter was born in February of 1887, arriving quickly after only a few hours of labor. She had Quincy's gray eyes and Olivia's lighter brown hair, and she was tiny and perfect and loud. "What should we name her?" Quincy asked, cradling the baby in his large hands with infinite care. Olivia thought for a moment. "Rose, after my mother." "Rose Morris," Quincy said, testing out the name, It's perfect. Hello, Rosie girl. Welcome to the family. With 2 children under the age of 3, life became even more hectic. But it was a good kind of chaos, the kind that came from being surrounded by people you loved. Tom was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. Quincy juggled fatherhood and business ownership with remarkable grace, and Olivia marveled at how far they'd both come from the 2 desperate people who'd formed a partnership 4 years earlier. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Olivia would think about her father. She wished he could have met Quincy, could have seen his grandchildren, could have known that his daughter was happy and thriving. But she thought he would be proud of what she'd built, the life she'd made. She'd taken the foundation he'd laid and built something new on top of it, something strong and lasting. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of childhood and the steady growth of their business. Tom started school when he was 6, a bright student who loved reading as much as Olivia did. Rose was more adventurous, always climbing things and getting into mischief. They added a 3rd child in 1889, another boy they named Daniel, who was quiet and observant from the start. By 1890, 7 years after that terrible March morning when Thomas Dawson died in the street, the Mercantile was firmly established as the premier general store in the region. They'd paid off all the improvements they'd made to the building, had money in the bank, and were discussing the possibility of opening a 2nd location in one of the smaller towns nearby. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Olivia asked one evening as she and Quincy sat on the front porch of the Mercantile, watching their children play in the street under the watchful eye of young Thomas, their employee who'd become almost like family over the years. "7 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Now look at us." "I always knew we'd make it," Quincy said, reaching over to take her hand. Even after 7 years of marriage, the touch of his hand still made her heart skip. "You were too stubborn to fail, and I was too invested to let you." Olivia laughed. "Is that the only reason you stuck around?" "Your investment." "Well, that and I fell hopelessly in love with you," Quincy said with a grin. "That might have had something to do with it." "Might have," Olivia agreed, leaning over to kiss him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the town they'd made their home. Tom was chasing Rose around in a game of tag while Daniel toddled after them, trying to keep up with his older siblings. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked quietly. "Giving up trapping, the freedom of that life to tie yourself down here?" Quincy turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for a single second. Olivia, before I met you, I was drifting. I had money and freedom, sure, but I didn't have purpose. I didn't have a home. You gave me both of those things. You gave me a reason to stay in one place and build something lasting. And you gave me love, real love, the kind I'd stopped believing existed. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you," Olivia said, her eyes stinging with tears. "I love you so much, Quincy Morris. Thank you for saving me when I needed saving and for letting me save you right back." "We saved each other," Quincy corrected, pulling her close. "And we built something beautiful together from the ruins. That's what we do, you and me. We take what we're given and we make it better." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and their children's laughter rang out in the summer evening, Olivia thought about how true that was. Her world had collapsed when her father died, leaving her alone and drowning in debt and grief. But Quincy had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known how to pray, and together they'd built something new from the ground up. A business, yes, but more than that. A home. A family. A life filled with love and purpose and joy. The road hadn't always been easy. There had been struggles and setbacks, hard winters when money was tight and summers when heat and drought made everything difficult. There had been sleepless nights with sick children and long days when the work seemed endless. But through it all, they'd had each other. They'd faced every challenge as partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through the hard times, and celebrating together when things went well. And now, sitting on this porch with her husband beside her and their children playing nearby, Olivia felt a profound sense of gratitude for how everything had worked out. She'd lost her father, and that grief would always be a part of her. But from that loss had come something unexpected and precious. She'd found love when she wasn't even looking for it. She'd discovered strengths she didn't know she had. She'd built a life that was richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined. "Mama, Papa, watch this." Tom called out, and they both turned their attention to their son, who was attempting to do a cartwheel in the street. It was a clumsy effort that ended with him sprawled in the dirt, but he jumped up laughing, and they applauded anyway. "That was excellent," Quincy called back. "Try pointing your toes next time." As the evening deepened into night, they eventually called the children inside. There was the usual chaos of getting everyone washed up and into their nightclothes, of reading bedtime stories and tucking them into their beds with kisses and whispered good nights. By the time Olivia and Quincy finally made it to their own bedroom, they were exhausted but content. "Another day survived," Quincy said with a tired smile as they lay in bed together. "Another good day," Olivia corrected. "They're all good days when I'm with you, even the hard ones." "Especially the hard ones," Olivia said, "because we face them together." Quincy pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was home, she thought, not the building they lived in or the town they'd made their life in, but this. The feeling of being held by someone who loved her completely, who'd chosen her and kept choosing her every single day. The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew older, the business continued to thrive, and Olivia and Quincy grew deeper into their love for each other and the life they'd built. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters, celebrated good harvests and successful business ventures. They watched their children grow and learn and develop their own personalities and dreams. Tom, it turned out, had inherited his grandfather's head for business, and by the time he was 12, he was already helping manage inventory and interact with suppliers. Rose was more interested in the horses, spending every spare moment at the livery or out at the Bar J Ranch, learning everything she could about training and breeding. Daniel was the scholar, always reading, fascinated by history and geography and the wider world beyond Custer. "We made good kids," Quincy said one evening when all three children were gathered around the kitchen table doing their homework, while Olivia prepared dinner and Quincy worked on the account books. "We did," Olivia agreed. "Though I think they're raising themselves at this point. We just point them in the right direction and try not to mess them up too much," Quincy laughed. "That's probably the best any parent can hope for." In 1895, 12 years after they'd first become partners, Quincy and Olivia made a decision that had been years in the making. They opened a second mercantile in the town of Hill City, about 30 miles south of Custer. Tom, now 16 and mature beyond his years, would manage the Custer store while they got the new location established. It was a big step, but they'd been planning for it carefully, and they both felt ready. The Hill City store was smaller than the Custer location but still substantial, and they used everything they'd learned over the past 12 years to set it up for success. Within 6 months, it was turning a profit, and within a year, it was as established as the Custer store had been. "We did it again," Olivia said as they reviewed the books for both locations one evening. "Built something from nothing." "That's our specialty," Quincy said with a grin. Maybe we should open a third store, make it a real empire." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Olivia said, though she was smiling. "2 stores and 3 children is plenty to manage for now." As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and innovations that were transforming the West, Quincy and Olivia looked back on nearly 2 decades of marriage and partnership with satisfaction. They'd built not just a successful business but a legacy. Their children were growing into capable, thoughtful adults. Their reputation in the community was solid. They'd made a difference in people's lives, providing goods and services that helped families and businesses thrive. But more than any of that, they'd built a love that had only deepened with time. They still held hands when they walked down the street. They still stole kisses in the storeroom when no one was looking. They still talked late into the night about their dreams and plans, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private jokes. The passion of those early days had evolved into something deeper and more sustaining, a partnership of mind and heart and spirit that Olivia knew was rare and precious. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Quincy closed both stores for the day, something they'd never done before except for major holidays. He'd arranged for friends to watch the children, and he took Olivia on a picnic to the creek where he'd first kissed her all those years ago. The trees were bigger now, the creek bed had shifted slightly, but the essential character of the place was the same. They spread a blanket on the bank and ate the lunch Quincy had packed, and then they lay side by side in the dappled shade, holding hands and watching clouds drift across the blue sky. 20 years, Olivia said softly. "When you proposed, did you think we'd make it this far?" "I knew we would," Quincy said with certainty. "I've never doubted us, not for a single day. We were meant to find each other, Olivia, meant to build this life together. Do you remember what you said to me that night, about building a life together, growing old on a front porch watching sunsets?" "I remember every word," Quincy said, turning to face her. "We're doing it," Olivia said, her eyes bright with tears. "Everything you promised, we're living it, and it's even better than I imagined." Quincy reached out to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You know what the best part is? We're not done yet. We've got years and years ahead of us still, watching our kids grow up and have families of their own, watching the businesses continue to thrive, growing old together just like I promised." "I can't wait," Olivia said, "for all of it. Every single moment, as long as I get to live them with you." They kissed there by the creek, a long, sweet kiss that tasted like summer and promise and 2 decades of shared history. When they finally pulled apart, they lay tangled together on the blanket, talking and laughing and simply being together in the way that only 2 people who'd built a life together could be. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon, they packed up their picnic and headed back to town, back to their children and their stores and the life they'd created. But they carried with them the renewal of their commitment to each other, the reaffirmation that what they'd built was worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Tom married a local girl named Sarah and gave them their first grandchild in 1905, a baby girl they named Olivia after her grandmother. Rose, true to her nature, married a rancher and moved to a spread outside of town where she raised horses and children with equal enthusiasm. Daniel went to college in the East, studying history, but he came back to Custer after graduating, unable to stay away from the town and family he loved. Quincy and Olivia gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the stores, letting Tom and eventually Daniel take over more of the management. They still came in most days, still kept an eye on things, but they also finally allowed themselves to slow down and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They traveled some, taking trips to Denver and San Francisco, and even once to Chicago. But they always came home to Custer, to the town that had been the setting for their love story and the foundation of their life together. In their later years, they did exactly what Quincy had predicted all those years ago. They sat on the front porch of the house they'd eventually built a few blocks from the mercantile, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Sometimes their children and grandchildren would join them, filling the house with noise and life. Other times, it was just the two of them, content in the comfortable silence of a couple who'd been together so long they didn't always need words. You ever think about that day? Olivia asked one evening when they were both in their 60s, their hair gray and their faces lined but their love still strong. The day my father died, sometimes, Quincy admitted. Not often, but sometimes. Everything changed that day, Olivia said quietly. My whole world fell apart. I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And then we found each other, Quincy said, squeezing her hand. And you built me a new world from the ground up, Olivia finished. A better world than I ever could have imagined. I miss my father every day, but I'm grateful for how things turned out. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you human, Quincy said gently. Your father would want you to be happy, Olivia. He wouldn't want you to spend your life grieving what you lost instead of celebrating what you found. I found everything, Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. I found love and partnership and purpose. I found a family and a home and a life worth living. I found you, Quincy Morris, and that made all the difference. We found each other, Quincy corrected, as he always did. And we built something beautiful together, something that will last long after we're gone. Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at the businesses we created that employ dozens of people and serve hundreds more. Look at the life we lived, the love we shared. That's our legacy, Olivia. That's what we leave behind. As they sat together watching another sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that terrible March morning in 1883 to this peaceful evening more than 40 years later, she'd traveled a road she never could have predicted. She'd lost her father and her innocence, had faced poverty and desperation, and grief that seemed insurmountable. But she'd also found love in the most unexpected place, had discovered strengths she didn't know she possessed, had built a life and a legacy that exceeded her wildest dreams. And all of it, every single moment, had been worth it for the chance to spend her life with the man sitting beside her, the cowboy who'd ridden into town on a spring day and changed her world forever. I love you, she said to Quincy, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd spoken them all those years ago by the creek. I love you too, Quincy said, pulling her close. Always have, always will. They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who'd taken broken pieces and built something whole, who'd faced impossible odds and come out victorious, who'd loved each other through decades of joy and sorrow and everything in between. Their world had collapsed and been rebuilt, and in the rebuilding they'd found something infinitely precious. They'd found each other. They'd found home. They'd found love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And as the night settled around them, and they finally rose to go inside to the warmth and light of the house they'd built together, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that this was how their story was meant to end. Not in tragedy or loss, but in the quiet contentment of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. She'd been given a second chance when she'd thought all chances were lost, and she and Quincy had made the most of every single day they'd been given. They'd raised good children, built successful businesses, and created a marriage that was a true partnership in every sense of the word. They'd laughed together and cried together, worked together and dreamed together, and through it all, their love had been the foundation that held everything else together. Years later, when Olivia finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81 with Quincy holding her hand, their children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren gathered to celebrate a life that had been full and rich and meaningful. They told stories of her strength and kindness, her business acumen, and her generous heart. They spoke of the love between her and Quincy that had been evident to everyone who knew them, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. Quincy followed his beloved wife just 6 months later, unable to bear too long without her by his side. They were buried side by side in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Custer, the same cemetery where Thomas Dawson had been laid to rest so many years before. Their joint headstone bore a simple inscription that their children had chosen carefully. Together they built a life of love and legacy. The mercantiles they'd founded continued to operate for generations, run by their descendants who carried on the traditions of fair dealing and quality service that Quincy and Olivia had established. The town of Custer grew and changed, but the Morris family remained a cornerstone of the community, living testaments to what two people could build when they faced adversity with courage and love. And sometimes, on quiet spring evenings, people walking past the creek outside of town would swear they could hear laughter carried on the breeze, as if somewhere in the eternal present, a young cowboy and a grieving woman were finding each other for the first time, beginning a love story that would echo through the generations and prove that even in the darkest moments, hope and love could build something beautiful from the ruins. Their story became local legend, passed down through families and shared over dinner tables. The tale of how Olivia Dawson's world collapsed when her father died, and how a cowboy named Quincy Morris built her a new one from the ground up, became a testament to resilience and love, and the power of two people committed to building something together. It was a story of the Wild West, of frontier determination and pioneer spirit. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple. A story of two people who found each other when they both needed saving, who chose each other every day, and who built a life together that was richer and more meaningful than either could have created alone. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the businesses or the money or the property, but the proof that love, real lasting love, could transform lives and create something enduring. That when the world collapsed, it was possible to build something new and better from the ground up, as long as you had the right partner by your side. Olivia and Quincy Morris had proven that truth with their lives, and their story would continue to inspire long after they were gone. A reminder that even in the hardest times, love could light the way forward and build a future worth living.